Were the disciples qualified to actually be disciples of Jesus? Well, in the eyes of those who knew them, probably not. John and James seemed a little bit angry. Thomas doubted. Peter was just impetuous. But what we see is that God takes people like them, people like us, and changes us. Change them, changes us. And the reason for it is so we can know Jesus and then take the good news of salvation to those around us. Join us today for a little bit longer lesson than normal, because I want to talk about 3 of Jesus' disciples. Join us as we continue in the Gospel of Luke. Let's go. Last week, 12 disciples. We went through, my goal was to do what it means to follow Jesus and what it means to be a disciple. And we were going through the 12 disciples. I made it through 2 of them last week. So I thought, okay, I'll do 2 last week, 10 this week. Of course, you know me, that clearly didn't work. So I found this fictional letter, and it's in your handout. I thought it was kind of funny. But this is like as if Jesus were asking a management company to help him pick out 12 disciples. So this is what they wrote back to him. Jesus, son of Joseph, he's a woodcrafter carpenter shop, is Nazareth in Galilee. And they're writing to Jesus, "Dear sir, thank you for submitting the resumes of the 12 men you have picked for managerial positions in your new organization. All of them have now taken the battery of tests, and we have run them through our computers. It is the staff's opinion that most of your nominees are lacking in background, educational, and vocational aptitude for the type of enterprise you are undertaking. They do not have the team concept. We would suggest that you continue your search for persons with experience and proven capability. Simon Peter is emotionally unstable and given to fits of temper. Andrew has no leadership skills at all. The 2 brothers, James and John, place personal interest above company loyalty. Thomas demonstrates a questioning attitude that would tend to undermine morale. We feel that it is our duty to inform you that Matthew has been blacklisted by the Greater Jerusalem Better Business Bureau. James, the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, have radical leanings and registered high manic depressive scores. Only one of the candidates shows great potential. He is a man of ability and resourcefulness who meets people well and has a keen business mind. He has contacts in high places and is highly motivated, ambitious, and responsible. We recommend Judas Iscariot as your controller and right-hand man. Sincerely yours, Jordan Management Consultants, Jerusalem. And I thought that was so funny because that is exactly what the world looks like. The world looks at things so differently than how Jesus does. And that's what we're finding from all of these disciples, is that the only person that the world would say fits your team is the only one that's gonna walk away from you. So Jesus looks at things completely different, and he looks at you and I. He takes nobodies, people like us that have nothing. We're not religious. We don't have a lot of smarts, a lot of brains, or whatever. We just kind of are blank slates when it comes to God. And God says, "You're exactly who I need." You're saying, "But I kind of have a jealousy problem, and I kind of have an anger problem or a bitterness problem." And he's going, "You're exactly what I want. Exactly, because I want to take you and change your entire life and change you from the inside." And that's his specialty. Now, what we saw last week is that every one of these disciples are different. Some are loud, some are quiet, some like to be in front, some like to be behind. That's just the way that God organized this with different people and different personalities. And so I want to talk today about James and John and Thomas. But what I want to stop for a second and talk about what it means to actually follow Christ. Because the problem is that we think, if you're raised in churches, or if you walked away from church because of this, it's because you were told you have to do certain things. You asked Jesus in your life, and now here's your list of rules and regulations that you have to do. And yet, if you really read Luke, when he walks by and sees Levi, who is the tax collector, he never said, "Levi, here's my card, and when you clean up your act, then you can come and follow me." He never said that. He said, follow me. Leave right where you are and come and follow me, and I will help change your life, but I don't need you to change in order to come to me. The prerequisite to anyone ever following Christ is you have to be a sinner. And some of us are worse sinners than others, and that's just the way it is. But Jesus says, those are my specialties, and that's a good place for you and I to be. He says, follow me, and the reason why he does that is because he says, if you spend time with me, just like the disciples spend time with me, then what you're going to notice in your life is that you're not going to be the way you used to be, and that's what we're going to see today. You came to me being this way, and when you're done and the day you die, you're going to be a completely different person. The things that you used to think and the way the world used to be in your thinking, now you don't think that way anymore. So that's what happens when Jesus comes in your life, because you're following him. You're not following rules, regulations, church. You're following him. And many times when you first come to Christ, you don't know what that means. I just talked to a girl yesterday, the girl who spoke at our marriage thing last night, Sandy Schrader. When she came to Christ, it was the most amazing thing. She said, I had never been to church. No one I knew was a Christian. I had never been in contact with God whatsoever. She said, my life was a mess. I knew I was lonely and miserable, and I couldn't figure out what the problem was. I didn't know how to find God. And her story was so cool. She said she went out one day and just said, I can't get out of bed any longer because I'm so depressed. She got in her car. It was a sunshiny day in St. Louis. And she said all of a sudden, in the middle of the sunshine, it starts hailing. Major hailstorm. And she said, I'm sitting there in my car thinking, okay, I don't even know if there's a God, but if you're out there, you need to show yourself to me. And she said, and then suddenly the hail stopped. And when it did, she said, okay, that's my first step that there probably is a God out there. Okay, she didn't really know what to do with that. She said that weekend she always goes running. Her friend called her that morning and said, I can't go running with you today. And she said, I started crying. I need a friend. My life is miserable. She said she went and she pulled into the little park where she runs. And she said this man was standing there and tried to get her attention. And she said, I don't even know what he wanted, but she goes, instead of hitting the brakes, I hit the gas pedal and just took off. And she said she got out of her car, went to the bathroom, and when she came out, this man was standing there and holding a Bible, handed it to her and said, Jesus loves you. I just needed you to know that. And that was her first person that ever shared anything with her. And so she's like, okay, God, now I know there's a God, and now someone just out of the blue handed me a Bible and says this Jesus loves me, and and that was how she began her life to following Christ. But when she did that, she didn't know anything about him. Nothing, blank slate. And because of that, God said, now I'm going to pour my life into you. And that's what he does with all of these guys. All right, last week, Peter and Andrew, and this week we're going to talk about James real quick. James is in the inner circle of Jesus. We always see Peter, James, and John. They're the three people that are always with Jesus. James was the oldest of the two. They were called the sons of thunder, and I'll tell you why in a second. And they were also the sons of Zebedee. Most people believe that Zebedee was a prestigious name because they were fishermen. They probably had a big fishing company, is probably what was going on back then. Probably prestigious, had a lot of money. A lot of people think, too, that they were from the line of Levi, which would mean they would know the high priest very well, and there's reasons behind that, too. So they were probably more of a prestigious family than other people. And when James decided to follow Christ and join in this inner circle, I put all these verses down, but I know we're not going to have time today, so they're in your handouts. Mark 5:37 through 41 is where he sees Jesus raise a little girl from the dead. Like and Jesus only let Peter, James, and John in there to see that. Matthew 17, I'll have to tell you this because I wasn't going to, but I will. I don't know if I told you. I don't think I did. But the other day we ran over our dog and killed him. Okay, I know. We didn't mean to. This was a dog we called Lassie. He looked like Lassie. And he's kind of getting older, and I think he's had a hard time seeing. But he's never chased Rob's truck. Like, that's just not something. So we were on our way out, and we felt this bump, and I said, what was that? And he's like, I have no idea. And I looked back, and there was Lassie, and by the time we got there, he was dead, okay? Now, for me, it was so weird. I was like, okay, I've never dealt with that. So what do we do with him now? So of course then Rob had to pick him up. And it was weird because he picked him up and he was like, there was literally no life in him. There was nothing. It was just this, and I was like, it was the first time I'd ever really dealt with that. So I was like, okay, he's dead. There's just nothing left there. But then I thought about this when I read this, and I thought, that's where this little girl was. And James walks in, and Jesus says, little girl, get up. And everyone's laughing at him like, she's dead. And he just breathes life right into her. And I thought, that would be kind of creepy if, like, we threw the dog in the garbage, and then suddenly we came home and he was popped his head out. Like, that would be kind of weird. But this is what happened, and James got to see this. And when he saw that, Jesus becomes really, really big to him. Matthew 17, 1 through 4 was the next one, and this is where Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to a mountain and sees this whole transfiguration, and he also sees Moses and Elijah. Now, these are prophets, and Moses, of course, we know back in Exodus, and Elijah was a prophet. So you're thinking James sees them, which is kind of weird in its own self, but suddenly, each time James sees something like this, Jesus becomes more and more and more trustworthy, and this is God, and I can trust him. He's big. He can do anything because I see that. The last thing is Mark 14, 32, and this is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross. And Jesus is just asking Peter, James, and John, would you just sit here and stay awake and pray for me? And they didn't. They fell asleep, which is really good for you and me, because it says these guys were just human, just like you and me. They had no idea about what Jesus was all about until mostly later on after he was resurrected. So many of you are listening, and you go, I don't even understand what this is all about. And you will, the more you follow him, you will understand more and more. The other thing with James is he probably was in second in command of this little group to Peter. And I thought about what James has and what we have too, is that we don't have Jesus like right in front of us all the time for 2 years to just pour into our life. But we do have his word, and we have the Bible, and that's why we always say at this study, pick up your Bible and read it. Start in Genesis. See the awesome things that God did in Genesis. I love Genesis, Exodus. I love those because I see God's hand in everything that goes on in it back then and in our life too. Because when James saw what Jesus could do, it just grew his faith. And when we read our Bibles and see what God did back then, it grows our faith. And like I woke up in the middle of the night last night, and I used to worry. I don't worry anymore. And I thought how awesome it is that something that I would have 3 years ago just been panic-stricken about, I laid in bed and thought about it. And instead of being panicked, I thought, God, I just know you, and I just trust that you're going to do something with this, and I'm not even going to worry about it, and I'm going to go back to sleep. Because that's what happens when Jesus comes. I've seen him do miraculous things over here, and I know he will again, because that's just who he is. But I wouldn't have known that had I not been put in really tough situations, had I not read my Bible, had I not read things like Moses. He's standing at the Red Sea, and the Egyptians are chasing him, and he's got millions of people. He has nowhere to go. And God parts the sea. And there they go, walk right through. And when I see that, I'm like, God, what looks totally hopeless to me is not hopeless to you at all. You're going to come through, however, I don't know how, but I know you will, because that is the God that we serve. I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't spent time reading his word. And James wouldn't have known that had he not spent time with Jesus. So that's what we have to do in order to grow our faith up. The Bible says that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So our faith will never grow if we're not in his word and reading and studying it. That's just how it works. Okay, James had this really big faith. He had a lot of compassion. I originally thought, when I think of James, I think like Irish redhead in the bars, at the Jerusalem Fitness Club, and he's this big guy, and so this is my view of him, even though he was Jewish, not Irish, and he probably looked nothing like that. Okay, but in my mind, I picture James like, let's go get him, and that's just how he is. Mark 3:17 says, and James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James. So them he gave the name, I'm not even going to try, I've tried to figure out how to say that name, and I don't know how to, so he gave them the name Sons of Thunder is kind of what that comes out to. So, and think about that. What is thunder? Thunder is like crackling, and it's loud and it's big. And so James and John get the nickname Sons of Thunder, which means that was their personality. They were just all out there. And we see this in this Luke 9:51 through 56. When the days were approaching for his ascension, so Jesus is getting ready to leave the earth, he was determined to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers on ahead of him, and they went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make arrangements for him. Okay, so Jesus sends two guys and says, hey, go get a hotel reservation, get some food, whatever, and we'll meet you back at the pool. Okay, so that's kind of where they were going. Verse 53, but they did not receive him because he was traveling toward Jerusalem. When his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them? But he turned and rebuked them and said, you do not know what kind of spirit you are. Let me try that again. But he turned and rebuked them and said, you do not know what kind of spirit you are of, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And they went on to another village. And I think that's the funniest scene ever. It's like, here's Jesus, and here's James and John, and they're like, yeah, these people aren't doing what we want because we're kind of awesome, so let's just call down fire from heaven and just destroy them all. And Jesus is like, who are you guys? Like, I got a lot of work to do here in the next 2 years because that is not my mission. I didn't come here to destroy people and hurt them. I came there to love people and draw them to me, not destroy them. But James and John, just like you and I, have to learn these lessons along the line. I realized that Jesus wanted to change all of the disciples and all of us, our worldview, the way we look at things. And I have an example of this. A couple weeks ago, we went to a thing called A Day at the Lake. And Rob had heard about this through this guy. And what it is it's for paraplegics, quadriplegics, and they have a day at the lake with them, and they come there and they can take them on a houseboat, they can take them fishing. They have this thing set up where they can take them skiing. Okay, now remember, these people can't feel anything from either their neck down or their waist down. So they strap them into these skis, and then they have Sea-Doos on the side with paramedics on there, and they take them out, and it's the funnest day for them ever. So we have a barbecue trailer, and we conned Sherilyn and her husband. They own a restaurant, Hobnobs, and we said, hey, come with us and barbecue. We got the trailer, you got the knowledge, so we came and we started doing this. Now, I learned that my view of life is completely different from someone that's in a wheelchair. And when I started setting up, this guy was helping me, and I'm setting up these tables of 8, and here comes all the chairs, and he finally stopped me, and he said, Lisa, he said, why don't you put 2 chairs here and no chairs here for the people that are in wheelchairs? And it never occurred to me that we are at a place where most of the people are in wheelchairs, and they're not going to sit in a chair. Like, it didn't even dawn on me. And when I did that, I thought, that is the problem with all of us and with the disciples. We come into this world thinking everything is this way, and then Jesus comes in our life and says, yeah, we're changing that. Now it's going to be this way. And that's what he does with us. And so my thinking had to drastically change for that day. And Jesus comes along and says, here's the deal, James and John, you're bent for these people in Samaria or wherever it was that they were. You're going to get mad and angry and go cuss them out and, throw a bomb in there, whatever. I mean, that's your normal bent. Now I'm going to change you and tell you we don't do that anymore. We love them. We pray for them. How sad that they don't want us there. That's sad. That should invoke compassion in your heart, not anger, but compassion and love to go in and say, Jesus, we need to pray for them because they're lost. And that's how he wants to change all of us. And I thought that he wants to do that with us. Like, we think of the person at work or the next door neighbor as like, well, they're just such a jerk. And Jesus comes in and says, I don't want you to think of them as a jerk anymore. I want you to think of them as someone who I desperately love and want to come to know me. So now that's going to be your job, to love them, not think they're a jerk. A lot of women here are like, my husband's such an idiot. Okay, well, instead of thinking he's an idiot, let's get down on our knees and pray for them and say, God, he may be an idiot, but God, I don't want to think that way, and I want to love this person. And so Jesus consistently is going to be changing us. I was laughing. I was walking out, and one of the ladies came up to me today, and I said, "How are you doing?" She said, God has just been really hard on me this week. Like, suddenly he's showing me about me, like what is in there. And I'm like, she's like, it's kind of yucky. And I was like, that's what he does, though. He starts revealing things in us, and he's saying, I don't want you to be that way anymore. So he says, I want you to look as an eternal viewpoint from me, not a worldly attitude. Last week we had our marriage class, and the counselor guy, Don, he has an ex-wife that I would say, I can't remember if I told you this. It's kind of like the ex-wife from hell, okay? She's really awful. She lied. They were in court all the time. She was just bad news. She kept his son from him. It was just a bad situation all around. And he found himself angry and bitter, and how could you do this? And God, why would you let this happen? And if you're in control, why haven't you changed it? And we've all been there, maybe not in that situation. But he said, finally one day, God said, I want you to look at her how I view her. And he said, suddenly I started looking at this woman as Jesus would look at her. He has compassion on her. He wants to heal her. He wants to save her. It's not like, because I think that I don't like someone, that God doesn't like him either. Well, we got to get away from that and look through the eyes of Jesus and say, okay, this person's hurting me, but God, how do you see that person? You love that person. So what can I do to promote that love instead of having it be all about me? And he said, when I did that, it changed my entire relationship with her and my son and my wife. I saw the world in a completely different view. I was thinking that we kind of tend to think, well, I would never go into, say to Jesus, well, I'm going to rain down fire on them. But I think in a sense we kind of do every day of our life in really smaller ways, because James and John felt very entitled. I am who I am, and I know Jesus, and I'm kind of awesome because we're his inner circle. And so you have to do things for me. Like, I'm the most important one. That's how they were thinking. And how we think is smaller little things, like you're pulling into a parking place and someone pulls in front of you. And you're furious. How could you do that to me? I was here first. It's all about me. And then you honk, and then you flip them off, and then you roll down the window and scream something at them, because we honestly think it's all about us. And Jesus comes along and says, I don't want you to do that. I want you to care more for that person and say, blessings to you that you just took my parking space. Okay, you're at a concert. You stayed there for 6 hours waiting for somebody, and somebody cuts right in front of you. And you're furious. Now, you can't even focus on the concert because you're so angry with the person who cut in front of you, because somehow we feel completely entitled. We did this in basketball. Dusty plays basketball, and it was last year sometime. There was I can't remember what I told you. This is what happens at the end of the year. I probably have told you every one of these stories, and you're like, yeah, we heard that last week and the week before. But we're standing there, and all the people were screaming at these refs. And I'm like, why are you doing that? But somehow we feel entitled to say things like, you suck, and get your glasses on, and you're pathetic, And we actually knew the guy that was reffing. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, wow, that's kind of a tough crowd. And he said, Lisa, there's 2 of us with 4 eyes watching 10 kids with 20 eyes. We cannot see everything. And the crowd was merciless, because they were like, we have rights. We expect you to see everything. And I was so frustrated by that, because I'm like, it's a stupid game. Like, you will never remember this a year from now. But in the moment, we think that we're entitled to say things and yell at people. And Jesus comes along and says, you do not have any rights any longer. As a follower of mine, here's what you have the right to do now. You have the right to love and be compassionate and have mercy, and that's what you have the right to do. You don't have the right any longer to say it's about me and my rights and the things that I want. Not anymore. Not going to happen. And that's what part of following Christ is, that he takes all those things like James and John, this whole sons of thunder, and he says, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. I'm going to change you so that now you pray for those people and love them, because he doesn't want us to stay the same any longer. And it was just a reminder to me that it really is important how we act as Christians, because Jesus says, how you treat people is how people look at me, him. That's just what happens, whether we like that or not. If we're a jerk to people, I was somewhere, where was I the other day? Oh, I was at the rec center. And I remember the first time I went there, I used to go in flip-flops all the time. I do know I told you this before. I went in flip-flops, and when I walked out of there one time, they looked at me and they said, you can't wear flip-flops if you're walking on the track. You have to wear tennis shoes. I didn't think I owned a pair of tennis shoes. I had to find them. I've owned the same tennis shoes for like 20 years. That says how I've never worn them, okay? But my first bent was, I go, are you joking? Because I really thought they were joking. And they're like, no, we really aren't. And now I could have been like, that's the stupidest rule I've ever heard. Like, really? Like, I pay my monthly dues here, and you're going to tell me what I can wear and what I can't wear? Okay, thankfully, I didn't do that, because now our Bible study is going to be there. Okay, we just had a marriage class there, so it would have been bad news. And they just put a big advertisement up. If you walk into the thing, a whole big women's Bible study thing up. But if I had acted like I wanted to act, they'd be like, yeah, we're not doing that. You can just go away, little girl. Okay, so it's really, really important how we act. And Jesus is saying, you know what? Raining fire down on these people is not really good for my mission. And for us being unforgiving and bitter and angry doesn't do much for the mission of Christ. And so that's what he is trying to teach them. Now, the interesting thing that happens to James is that he's so bold that he's a threat to the government. And he is the very first disciple that is martyred for his faith. We see this in Acts 12:1. Now about that time, Herod the king laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. Okay, so here's this horrible scene, and you're like, okay, I just want to follow Jesus, and we're going to talk about this in September, what that actually means. But James ended up loving Christ so much that even dying, and we're talking of just a few years later, it wasn't like he was a Christian for 50 years and got, a sword. He was a young believer, and yet he was that devoted to Christ at that point. And then look at verse 3. When he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. When he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out before the people. So Peter was kept in prison, but the prayers for him was being made fervently by the church to God. Okay, so now we see 2 things. Now this is what frustrated me about this, because suddenly you see, but we prayed for James. God, we wanted you to save James, but he died. Like, how fair is that? Now we prayed for Peter, and you saved Peter. And you all have been there, just like we have. I prayed for this, God, and you said no. But I prayed for this, and you said yes. And now I'm kind of totally confused. And I think we've talked about this all year long, that we have got to get on the, God, not my will, but yours. I really pray that you save James. But if that's not your will, and more people will come to Christ because of the death of James, which I think did happen, then I've got to go on your thing. This is what I want, but more than what I want what you want. And Peter got to live this life. He ended up, of course, dying a martyr's death. But I think it all comes back to realizing that behind the scenes, when there's tragedy, God really does have a purpose. And we can rest in that instead of being angry with him. So I think about Saeed a lot, who's in prison over there in Iran. And I started thinking that they just had a big day of prayer for him. If you are on Facebook, I sent that out. A big day of prayer for Saeed to God, release him. Do whatever you need to do. But I started thinking, what if Saeed never gets released? Like, what if he really dies in prison there? And that's not what anybody wants. But what if because of his death, if he dies, 100,000 Muslims come to Christ because his wife got to go on TV or radio or whatever it is in Iran, and she was able to share the gospel to millions of Muslims and share Saeed's story about the Jesus that we believe in. Isn't this radical person that you have been taught? But he's from the Middle East, and he's the Savior. And she was able to do this just a week or 2 ago. And it was amazing. And what if Saeed was all about just people coming to Christ? And you know what Saeed would say? Sign me up for that. Because when I signed up to follow Christ, That's what I signed up for. Just like James signed up for that. You don't know that at the time, and you don't feel like it at the time, but somehow or another, you work your way into that. So most of us aren't sitting in a prison in Iran right now, and we get that. And most of us probably never will be persecuted for our faith to that extent. But for us, it may be something like, what do you mean, God, you're asking me to stay with my husband? He's kind of a jerk. And God's saying, I want you to stay with him, and I want you to be Jesus to him, and I want you to love him. And even though it's really hard, and I totally get that, just like it's hard for Saeed to be in prison. It was hard for James to have a sword and run through him. That's just the way it is. And I want us to get to the point where we say, God, I'm going to do what you want me to do. And it may mean staying at a job that you hate, but you just started a Bible study, and now you can share the gospel more, but you hate your boss, and he's a jerk. But what are you going to do? Are you going to do what's best to further the gospel, or are you going to do what's best for yourself? And I think that's what comes down to following Jesus. It becomes suddenly not about me any longer. Maybe you have cancer. And you're like, God, I really want you to take this cancer away. And he's like, you know what? Your cancer I am going to use to bring so many people to Jesus. You sit in a waiting room all day long. Take some one-way books, hand them out. Show people that Jesus is in it, even though you're miserable. And he can be. And you can stand on that and share your faith to people who are absolutely hopeless. So it's not a bad thing. It's just how you're going to look at it, what it means when you're a follower of Christ. So there's always a higher purpose and a bigger plan, which usually talks about like how many people can come to Jesus through what I'm going through right now. So that's not a bad thing. Now, what we see in churches today is not that. I put it in your handout there. What we see here, I found this on a site, 10% of church members cannot be found. 20% of church members never attend church. 25% admit that they never pray. 35% admit they never read their Bibles. 40% admit that they never contribute to the church. 60% never give to missions. 70% never assume responsibility within the church. 85% never invite anyone to church. 95% have never won anyone to Christ, but 100% expect to go to heaven. Okay? And that's just, and yet when you look at the disciples, you say, something is wrong with our culture here in America if that's what people actually think. Because the disciples would never do that. They're like, no, I have a job regardless of what. I will go to church, and I do want to give, and I do want to do those things because that's what I'm called to do as a disciple of Christ. So Martin Luther said, a religion that gives nothing and costs nothing and suffers nothing is worth nothing. And he's saying, you know what? If we're followers of Christ and we're not giving anything or doing anything, our faith is really worthless. James talks about that. But I found this letter that we are making it through James. Like, what is that? I have 2 more to do. I'm kind of frustrated. All right, I'm not going to read that. It's in there. It's a letter that Saeed's wife wrote to him, and it's really sweet. But I realized this when I was listening to something she did. They just had Saeed's 13-year anniversary of when he came to Christ. 13 years, and he's sitting in a prison in Iran, and he's worshiping God, and he's sharing people, and he's dealing with the torture and the internal bleeding that he won't get any help for, and yet all he wants people to do is come to Jesus. 13 years. I think 13. I've been a Christian for I don't know how many years, a lot. And I mean, you want to throw me in a prison, I'm scared. Okay, I'd be like, la la, and then they start torturing. I'm like, la even more, because I don't like stuff like that. So I don't know how good I would do that. And I've been a Christian a long time, and so I'm thinking that I need to learn what it really means to be a disciple, someone who follows Christ. And it's really just like Paul did. To live as Christ, to die as gain. I want my life to be all about him. And what does that look like, and how do we get there? All right. I want to, let's get on to, I'm never going to get anywhere. I just feel like crying and giving up. Okay. Kyle Idleman wrote his book called Not a Fan. It's in your handout. The back cover says this: the dictionary defines a fan as an enthusiastic admirer. Fans want to be close enough to Jesus to get all the benefits, but not so close that it requires sacrifice. Fans may be fine with repeating a prayer, attending church on the weekends, and slapping a Jesus fish on their bumpers. But is that what the extent of the relationship Jesus wants? Jesus was never interested in having admirers. It's not fans he is looking for. And here was my bottom line. What he's looking for is that he's looking for disciples, learners, followers, people that are going to go and live for him. That's what he is looking for. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, salvation is free, but discipleship will cost you your life. And that's so true. Like, you want to come to Christ, it's free. Jesus, here's my sin, you can have it. And he's saying, I paid the price, you're good to go. But somewhere along the line, being a disciple of Christ is going to cost you something, because your life will change, whatever it is. But he said that what happens is that as Jesus changes your life, remember, we're not talking rules and regulations. We're saying Jesus comes in and he starts changing you, and suddenly you're going to be hit with, I have a choice to make. Should I have that affair? My old self would be like, absolutely, I'm having that affair. My husband's an idiot. Or now that I'm a follower of Christ, I could not possibly, suddenly and you'll know what the right thing to do, because Jesus has so changed your life that way. He told of a guy that, this is not in my notes, this is why I can't get through this lesson today, but he told of a guy who was 20 years old, and he was brilliant and got this job at this, recording place or something. But part of his job would be sitting, and a section of this would be watching adult porn, I would assume, and doing whatever it was with that. And he said, as a follower of Christ, they basically said, any money you want, you take it, you're the best for this job. And he told the pastor, he said, I realize I can't do it. I can't, because as much as the money is great and everything, my faith in Jesus comes first. And he said, he went to the people at the job and said, I can't take this job, and this is why. I can't do that because of my faith. And they said, no one has ever said that to us before. He said they gave the job to someone else. He still, as of when this was taped, did not have a job. But the kid said, I want you to know, and please tell the congregation that God has always taken care of me. I've never gone without. Every single day that I don't have a job, he's always been faithful. Because God just does that. He's going to take care of you when you make the right decisions. That's what he's doing. All right, who do you want to talk about? Thomas? Let's talk about Thomas, and we'll come back and talk James next time. Thomas is kind of, he's got a bad rap. My son told me yesterday, I was talking about Thomas. We have 3 minutes. How are we going to do this in 3 minutes? I'm going to talk really fast. Okay, Thomas is John 11:16. He's known as Doubting Thomas because he's a very pessimistic person. If you said the sky was blue, he would say it's black. If you said Jesus loves you, he would say probably not. Everything that you would say, Thomas is going to doubt it, and he's going to be a pessimist. Look at John 11:16. This is just a little insight into Thomas's life. Jesus is getting ready to go raise Lazarus from the dead, but they had just left because someone wants to kill Jesus, and now Jesus says, we're going back. And this is what Thomas says. John 11:16. Therefore Thomas said to his fellow disciples, let us also go so that we may die with him. Okay, so it's not even like, someone says Eeyore, it's not poor me. It's let's just go with him and die, whatever. And then we see him in John 14, I won't even read it, 2-6, where Jesus is saying, I'm going to go to prepare a place for you, and you know where I'm going. And Thomas comes back and says, Lord, we don't even know what you're talking about, okay? We don't know where you're going and how you're going to get there, and we're totally confused. And so the thing with Thomas is that he was always honest. He didn't cover it up. A lot of people, if they're a Christian, they doubt, they're fearful. They're like, I don't know if I really believe that. And they don't talk about it. They just put on this big front. Thomas is not like that. He's like, no, Jesus, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And I'm kind of confused, and I need you to tell me. But the great thing about Thomas is that he never let his faith or his doubt stop him in his faith. Because a lot of people have a lot of doubts, and then they walk away. Thomas didn't do that. He stuck it out. Instead of walking away, he went to church. Instead of leaving the disciples, he went back. And if you're a doubting kind of a person, then take this summer and start finding some books that talk about doubt, how to get over those kind of doubts. Look at John 20:24. But Thomas, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. This is after Jesus is resurrected. Everyone now has seen Jesus except Thomas. So the other disciples were saying to him, "We have seen the Lord." But he, Thomas, said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the imprints of the nails, and put my finger into the place of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." After 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas was now with them this time. Good thing for Thomas. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, and stood in their midst and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Reach here with your finger, and see my hands, and reach here your hand, and put it into my side, and do not be unbelieving, but believing." The cool thing about that is that Jesus didn't say, "Thomas, you're just a spoiled brat. Really? For as much as I have done for you, you're not going to believe in me? What are you thinking? I've spent all this time with you, blah, blah, blah." Jesus didn't say that. He was like, "Thomas, you doubt? I'm going to prove to you. Put your hand in here and let's go. Okay, now you know I'm real. Now you know I'm true." Look at Thomas's response in 28. Thomas answered and said to him, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus said, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are they who did not see me and yet believed." And the cool thing about Thomas is that historically, he ends up, from what tradition says and church history says, is that he was the first one to go into India and share the gospel. There's actually churches in India that will trace their roots all the way back to this doubting Thomas, because he didn't take his doubts and stop him. He took them and said, I doubt, but I wanna believe. John Ortberg, I put this on there for you, wrote a book called Faith and Doubt, and we'll just end with this real quick. He said, what if, this is the back cover, and I thought it was really good, faith and doubt, what if the most important word is the one in the middle? We often think of doubt as the opposite of faith, but could it actually strengthen our relationship with God? According to John Ortberg, best-selling author and pastor, the very nature of faith requires the presence of uncertainty. In this refreshingly candid look at a life of faith, he traces the line between belief and unbelief, less a dividing line between hostile camps than a razor's edge that runs through every soul. His findings point us towards the relief of being totally honest. Questions can expand our understanding, uncertainty can lead to trust, and honest faith can produce outrageous hope. Written from Ortberg's own struggle with faith and doubt, this book will challenge, comfort, and inspire you with the truth of God. So here's a book. If you're a doubter, go get it, look it up, find it, read it this summer. Pour yourself into something. All right, I hope that was encouraging today to know that Jesus can still use us even though we are all seriously flawed. See you next week.